Hi. Hi, everyone. My name is Swami. So glad you're all here with us today. Claire and I are excited to do this webinar. Please hold on just a minute while we wait for people to finish signing up. There are still some people signing in. So please, if you don't mind holding on just a minute, we'll get started. So excited you're all with us today. Okay, wonderful. So happy to be here today. Glad you're all with us today. Claire, welcome. Thank you for being here with me. It's my co-host. Hi, everyone. My name is Swami, Venkatesh Swaminathan, and I'm the founder and CEO of Life Launcher. Claire and I will both introduce ourselves in just a few minutes. But before we do that, I just want to kind of set the ground rules a little bit and give you some housekeeping information. First of all, if you have questions as we go through this process, please just put them in the little chat window so that you can see, so that we can see them, and Claire or I will we'll talk about them as we go along. So we do have a question section at the end, but no need to hold your questions until we get to that, although you're welcome to ask them then. But if you ask them as you go along, we can often address them more quickly. So if you have questions, please ask. And sometimes we might say, well, that's a great question. We'll hold it till the end and answer it then. But if you have questions, please just ask. With that said, let's jump in. Today's presentation is about what juniors and their families need to know about college admissions. It is, this is that time of year when parents, students all get, anxious about college admissions. And so some of you here are juniors, some of you are parents of juniors, some are sophomores or parents of sophomores. And then, of course, I see my friend Vinay's on. He's also a fellow counselor like us. So there are others who are who aren't in either category, but welcome to all of you. So I'm so happy that you're all here. So let's talk a little bit about how we'll go through this presentation. As I said before, if you have questions, please put them in the chat so that we can address them as we go. Before we jump in to introductions and everything else, I want to take a step back and say, let's look at kind of how this admission season has gone. We're doing this presentation. If you're watching this live, we're doing this presentation in the spring, in the winter of 2026, in February 2026. And so at this point, we have some of our students' admissions results already in and some yet to come. So we're obviously excited about the results that are yet to come. But I want to highlight a little bit the kinds of things that we are really proud of. I want to talk about 3 kids for whom the outcomes, I think, say something about them. They also say something about kind of the approach we take to college admission. So we have one student who was admitted to the Eccles Scholar Program at the University of Virginia. Eccles is one of UVA's most selective honors programs. It's one of the most exceptional honors programs of any college in the country. Eccles, among other things, one of those programs that really allow students to pick and choose the courses they take to a great extent. And these kinds of honors programs are something we take a lot of pride in helping students find, because, of course, when people start these programs, this, college admission process, they've heard of some names. They've heard of Harvard or Berkeley or UCLA, MIT, but often they haven't heard of all these exceptional places within large public universities. I do want to point out that none of these students that I'm talking about were from the states that we're talking about. So the student who got into Eccles Scholars Program wasn't from Virginia. She was from Texas. Another student I want to talk about also got into a different honors program at the University of Virginia. It's called the Jefferson Scholars Program. He's the finalist. That program hasn't been decided yet, so it should be decided shortly. And the Jefferson Scholars Program is basically a full ride program to the University of Virginia that is extraordinarily hard to get. And it is more than just about academics. It's about being that exceptional student who stands out. To win it, you have to be nominated by your school counselor. And the student wasn't from Virginia, so they had to go find their school counselor and ask for a nomination. Each counselor only gets to nominate one student. So again, an exceptional program for an exceptional student from the state of Tennessee in this case. And then the final was a student who was passionate about studying medicine and wanted a pre-med program. And while she still has other applications yet to come and results at other colleges yet that will come through, she was accepted to the pre-med program at Case Western University. Case has one of the finest pre-med programs anywhere in the country. Some of you know I write a Substack, and we'll talk more about that later. Claire and I are both authors in that Substack. And one of the things that, these highlight two blog posts that were on that Substack recently. One, a series focusing on pre-med admissions and how students, applying to pre-med programs can really manage their process. And the other, focusing on these kinds of honors programs, the ones at University of Texas, University of Virginia, many others, which are really exceptional ways to get an education at some very selective programs that you perhaps may not have heard of. And I think helping students find and get into these very selective programs is, an important part of what coaching is really supposed to accomplish. So I do want to say, just again, a little housekeeping note to distract myself is that while I speak, I see Claire is posting all the links in the chat. So, all the links to the Eccles Scholar Program, the Jefferson Scholars Program, Case Western, and the Substack links and so on are all in the chat. So if you want to, you can just click them and you should be able to access them, now or after the presentation. But yeah, Claire, any thoughts about any of that as we run through this?
No, I mean, just that I think, yeah, like you said, it's just exciting sort of opportunities that maybe aren't on the top of, maybe not the most common, but really interesting options for these students and really exciting, aspects of these programs that they're going to be able to take advantage of.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's really important about this entire process for students and families is to really look out. I hate to use a cliche like this, look outside the box, but really look, expand their vision a little bit and consider options that they may not have heard of, but they're really exceptional for the student who's applying, right? So, and I think that becomes more and more important as we go through this process. So let's talk about what we hope you'll learn in this process, what actually mattered in this year's admission cycle. I think we certainly want to cover that. We want to talk about how colleges will evaluate your student, your child, you perhaps, if you're the student, and how you can stand out in the process, and a 12-month roadmap that you can act on that, basically walks you through step-by-step how college admissions really works. One of the things about this entire process, Claire, you and I have talked about this quite a bit, is that, students talk to other students, parents talk to other parents, like people talk to one another, and they're constantly rubbing each other up. I'm doing this, and someone says, I'm doing this, and the other person says, well, should I be doing that too? My friend's doing blah, blah, blah. Should I do that too? There's a constant revving up of the anxiety in the process. And I think one of the things we want to emphasize in our work, and one of the things I want to emphasize in this process, I think that Claire and I want to really leave you with, is the idea that if you have a roadmap, you understand how the process works, and you stick to it in a thoughtful, disciplined way, you will achieve better results than trying to be everybody else. So, Claire, does that make sense? Do you have any thoughts to add about that? I know this is something you're also very passionate about.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think students are always sort of looking for some magic wand, that's going to make this process, go exactly the way they want. But I think, like you said, if they just sort of follow the steps, we're going to get into all of it, but, do the research, look for things that really, interest them, find a school that's a good fit, put together strong applications, all of that, they are going to end up at a great place. So I think, yeah, you don't want to just be reactionary. And like you said, the minute you hear something, oh, I have to do that too. So I think really just forging your own path and, taking the steps to reach the goals that you want is really important to keep the process calm and smooth and less stressful.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the calmness that you always exude, Claire. It's a great asset in this work. Yeah, so what I want to talk about really is why junior year matters. And, sometimes college admissions can feel a little like, some weird combination of a marathon and a sprint, in the sense that it's it takes a long time, all 4 years of high school. But then at the very end, you do sort of have to do this little sprint, starting the summer of junior year, when there's a bunch of things that have to happen, and then deadline after deadline starts to hit. So But junior year is really a critical foundation year for most students because it is the most important year in your college applications. Colleges sort of read your application. You can always think of it as if they were reading your application backwards. I'm not sure that's literally true, but they sort of start with the end and say, how did you do in the year closest to your application? And so that year, because it's junior year, matters a lot, and it matters usually more than any other year. If you've had a very successful freshman and sophomore year, then it's quite important that you continue to show that success and growth. And if you haven't had a very successful freshman and sophomore year, junior year is a time when you can really turn the ship around, right? And just say, well, actually, I worked hard, did better in junior year, something changed for me. And that's a powerful story as well. So one way or another, doing well in junior year is quite important. And that upward trajectory is an important part of college applications at many, many, many universities across this country. It's also kind of a growth here in terms of students themselves, right? Because it's when students kind of define who they are. They think about their values, their strengths, their passions, and those things really start to become compelling raw material for their essays they're going to write. Sometime in the summer of junior year, they'll start writing their Common App essay, the UCPIQs, the University of Texas essays, and so on, the Why Us essays, and so on. And people often have the idea that these essays are written through some act of magic, but they're not, right? And Claire, maybe you have some thoughts about that, because I feel like people have this idea that this is that there is some magic to this process of writing essays, but there isn't. And I'm curious if you can shed some light on that, but how this just comes together from self-reflection and process.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing is that, especially for the Common App essay, it's such a specific type of essay and a specific type of writing that it's just impossible to do in one or two drafts. You have to know going into the process that it's going to take multiple drafts, and that what it looks like at the beginning and the end is most likely not going to be even close to the same. And so, yeah, I think it's one thing that we do with our students is, we have them do sort of short reflective writing exercises throughout our work with them, even as sophomores and earlier on in junior year before they're getting to college admissions, just to help them develop that ability to do this style of writing, which is so specific. It's so reflective and personal. And so, yeah, I think just realizing like strong writing and really telling the story in a clear and unique way is hard. And it takes drafts and working on it. And yeah, like you said, it's not just going to come together and just be a perfect essay because you want it to be.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so this is the one, all of these things, your academics, your extracurricular activities, your interests, your goals, all kind of come together, and you can create a cohesive story that you can present as part of your application, right? So when someone reads your application, they will say, yes, that makes sense. Like that, it's a simple idea, but it's a very powerful idea to say. When someone reads your application, they should say, yes, that makes sense. I see why the student is applying to this college. I see why they're applying to this program. I can see what they bring to it. Makes sense. So it's also, if we turn it around and say, why does it matter to parents? I think junior year is also the year when anxiety sometimes takes over the process. Parents will often start with questions. As I said, we were talking about just a few minutes ago, Claire, like there's a huge amount of information out there, right? They see a piece in the Wall Street Journal, or they see a piece on TV, or their kids tell them about something they saw on TikTok, or their parents, their friends tell them something about whatever. And people start to have questions. What do I do about this? What do I do about that? Should I ask my child to do this too? Should I ask my child to do that too? Because there's too much information, it's hard to know what actually matters. And then what ends up happening is that the entire conversation ends up into conflict. I can't count the number of times that parents have come to us halfway through the process and said, my child stopped talking to me about this because every time we talk, we just get in a fight. And it's really important for parents to understand their role in this process. Their role is to, be role models, to show their kids how to handle uncertainty, to be mentors, supporters. but not necessarily to be the mechanics of every step in the process, right? So I think that's why this year can be really difficult on the relationship between parent and child. And I think having a structure and a plan and saying, we're following our structure, we're following our plan in a disciplined, thoughtful way. We're not going to get distracted by every little thing that comes along, will help everyone. Claire, does that make sense? Do you have any thoughts about that, like whole relationship thing?
Yeah, I mean, I just think, that's why we're here. We sort of know the way the process works, and so I think we can just go into it with confidence, and we're obviously removed a little bit, right? Like we're not feeling that anxiety because we know this process and we are helping families, go through it. And so I think that sort of objective understanding of the process can be really helpful when someone else is feeling stressed about it or worried or any of the, or even excited, all of it. We can just sort of be like a calm part of that process.
For sure. Yeah. I just want to say again, because there are some new people who've joined, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Just type them into the chat and we'll try to answer them as we go. Just feel free to ask us questions. I think it's one of the things that will make this entire thing really special. So one of the things about all of that is, like, students need to understand all of the parts of the process that colleges are looking at, right? They want to understand, who is this person and what are they ready to contribute to our campus? So academic depth can vary. It's not a single thing. They're not saying, you should have taken these courses. Other countries' systems do, if you apply to colleges in the UK or other countries, they often will just say, if you want to study this major, you have to have taken these courses. American colleges are much looser about that, but they are looking for academic depth. They are looking to see that you challenged yourself with rigorous courses when those were available to you. So if your school offers a more rigorous choice, they want to see whether you took it, and if you didn't, why you didn't. They also want to make sure that you've been thinking about, preparation for your intended major, that you're, thinking about, like, hey, if you want to study chemistry, how did you do when you studied AP chemistry? If you want to study computer science, how did you do when you studied math? If you want to study engineering, how did you do when you studied math or physics or so on? Like, how did those classes work out for you? And your values and directions, what is it you want to do with your education? Many universities really want to see that you have a sense of purpose in your education. Now, I realize that can be a little bit of a challenge for students because their sense of purpose is still developing. And that also sometimes it can change, right? So you get to college and you thought you wanted to do this, but you get to college and something else emerges. But it's fine if it changes, and it's fine if you're not 100% sure. But having thought about it, showing that you've thought about it is really important. And then, of course, community leadership. How did you work in your community to make a difference in your neighborhood, in your town, in your church, in your temple, whatever that word community means to you, right? Within your dance school or your orchestra or choir, whatever that means to you, your robotics team. And then connecting your passion with potential majors, right? If I can see from your activities list that the student really spends a lot of time doing debate, and then they can show that interest in debate carries through to an interest in political science or law, it's easy to see why the student would want to study this. Yeah. Claire, do you have thoughts, questions about any of that as we're going through?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just say, I think it is, you like you said, you can see that genuine interest, right? It's not like, oh, but do I have to take this one class? Like there's rarely like some part that you have to do, but you have to show this depth. You have to show that you're preparing for your major. But I guess I often get like questions from students that are asking about, like, is this one thing going to be like the deal breaker? And I think it goes to sort of the holistic review of applications. They're looking at everything. So it's about like putting the pieces together and making the picture that you want to show, without thinking that one thing is going to be like the make or break factor.
Right. And And I think, it's really like when we talk to students a lot, that comes up sometimes, right? Like if I got a C in calculus, will that be a deal breaker when I'm applying to college? And it's impossible to say, and it wouldn't be fair to say that it makes no difference at all, because it does make a difference, right? It isn't a deal breaker, but it does make a difference. And I think there are some important things that we kind of have to keep in mind. One is, like, this is just a life principle, right? Don't worry about things that have already happened, because you can't change them. So get on with the rest of your life. Worry about the things that are within your power to change. Like, don't miss an opportunity to get a good grade this semester because you're worried about the bad grade you got last semester, right? That's really important. Like, don't let the anxiety derail your performance now, right?
Yeah, I think that's something students really struggle with.
That's something students really struggle with, especially because of the anxiety that they feel and that sometimes they feel from parents and others. And so it's really important to say, okay, that's happened. Whatever's happened, we're going to put it in the books. It's over here. It is the lay of the land, right? And sometimes we can remedy it. We can suggest you can retake that semester and get a better grade or whatever. We have choices where we will suggest choices, but anxiety over that past doesn't help your outcome, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then think about path and purpose. I think this is one thing that students often struggle with, because they like in other words, for example, sometimes students will come to us and say, I want to study computer science, just as an example, right? For the longest time, that was the prototypical career that people thought, well, I'm going to study computer science because I can get a good job getting, it doesn't really matter. I don't have to be that good at it. Mm-hmm. That's not so true anymore because of AI. But sometimes if you don't have a real clear connection to what you want to study, what ends up happening is that you may not thrive at it. You may not do well when you get to college. And colleges are looking for students who, when they see the application, they can say, yeah, I can see why the student would come and thrive at this program. I can see why they do really well at it, right? And I think part of that is also answering the question, like, what kind of environment helps you thrive, right? One student I was speaking to just recently was very clear. I loved how clear he was, like looking at colleges, and he says, I really want a college where I can learn by doing. I don't learn well sitting in a classroom, And if you looked at his academic track record and extracurricular track record, you can absolutely clearly see that, right? He like his team has done exceptionally well, but his academics are solid, and so saying, okay, well, for this student, an environment where their education is more integrated and where they are constantly trying to apply their learning is what makes success, right? And that's really, really an important thing to think about. Does that make sense, Claire?
Yeah, we have a question in the chat related to this. Someone asked, how can you find a balance between academic depth and passion for your application acceptance?
Yeah, a great question. This is yes. So there's academic breadth, academic depth, and passion. All three matter. Academic breadth, meaning that in the ideal case, colleges want to see students who have taken 4 years of English, 4 years of math, 4 years of second language, 4 years of social sciences, and 4 years of science, right? That's like the magical case. They also want to see students who have demonstrated a passion for their major with some specific courses. You can't do both, and the answer also varies by college, right? Some colleges are very focused on preparation for your major. If you think about the University of Texas, it's the stereotypical school in that, the, quote, fit to major. In other words, they really want to see a student have depth in the major that they're applying to, and they admit by major, so they have different admissions rates for different majors. Other universities, so for example, Brown, is less concerned with preparation for an intended major because they don't admit by major anyway. Then they're just looking at your application to say, well, is this someone Brown would want to have as a student? And once they get here, they'll decide what they want to study. You can study literally anything you want once you get to Brown. So they don't put a lot of barriers on people switching from one field to another. So it's a great question. I think the first thing is to not think about these in these intellectual terms, but rather think about them in terms of like, I want to do, as you know, I want to lay a solid groundwork, I want to do really well, and I want to demonstrate my passion. Like, if you just think about it in simple terms, it's not a formula. And if wherever one tries to find a formula, it turns out into a mess. Claire, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we really have to look at each student individually to make those choices.
And then, Swami, there's one other question. Someone asked, when we are writing essays, can they use AI tools like Grammarly or Copilot to help with the presentation of their thoughts?
Great question. Awesome question. And Claire, I know you said you had a question too about AI. So well, I will talk about that in a minute after this. But so there's a piece on the Substack, and if you don't mind, Claire, maybe you can find it on the Substack. There's a piece about AI and college admissions and posted. So we actually did the research and posted it, summarized each college's policy about AI. That was some months ago, back in August or September, I think. So things have changed, of course, and we'll continue to monitor it. Not that one, though. There was a piece a long time ago about AI and college admissions. Whether you can use you can always use something like Grammarly pretty much everywhere, with very few exceptions. You can use things like Grammarly for actual grammar checking. When you go beyond grammar checking, things start to get a little hazy. Generally speaking, most universities will say it's okay to use AI as a brainstorming tool to say, I'm thinking about this idea. What do you think? Like a partner, a conversationalist, like, you might talk to us, right? So you might say, well, what do I think of this idea? What do we think of that idea? How does, that kind of conversational. It is pretty much never okay to use AI to actually write your essays. In between those is a lot of gray area. And different universities just have different policies about that. So really, that's one reason why this time of year, it's like so much confusion right now about all of this. I'd say in general, this principle is true, that to the extent you use AI, you should use AI to help you think and evaluate your ideas. And perhaps then to check your grammar if you need to, but you should not use AI under any circumstances to do your writing for you. That would be a no-no at pretty much every university. At every university, when you apply on the Common App or the UC application or the Cal State application, any other, you're always certifying that your work is yours and that you did this. And so anything that basically takes away the authorship of the piece from you would be unacceptable to a university.
And I would just add, I think it's why sort of finding, why we work with students on reflective writing and helping them find their voice, because if you're really using your own voice in your writing, it's going to sound very different than AI. And Absolutely. So it's, I read so many essays that it's very obvious if a student has used AI. So it's also going to be very obvious for admissions readers. So and then it's just not that interesting. So it really is about cultivating your own voice. And then when you hear a student's voice coming through an essay, like we've been saying, that as a piece of the whole application really brings everything together, and you can see who this person is, who this student is, who's done all of these activities and taken all these classes. And I think the voice of AI obviously is so
flat
and flat.
Yeah. Unemotional, flat. Yeah. And developing your own voice is so important in this writing process. Telling a story that's genuinely interesting is both easier and harder than people think. It's easier in the sense that it doesn't have to be a big story. People often think that what makes it interesting is that it's a big story. I found a cure for cancer. It doesn't have to be a big story like that. It can be a little story. I helped a kid in my tutoring program, who was struggling, whatever. It can be a beautiful, powerful story. But it's also harder in the sense that it's really about figuring out what matters to you and what story would say something about who you are. And there's no way on earth that AI can know who you are and help you tell that story. So therefore, be mindful about how you use it. As Claire said, think about your own voice. there are some universities, Brown is the example, which absolutely positively forbid any use of AI anywhere in the application. When you apply to Brown, you have to say, I haven't used AI anywhere. So there are some universities that take a very hard line. There are others that are a little fuzzier about what the line is. Generally speaking, the voice of AI, sounding like AI wrote an essay, is the kiss of death to most applications. It sounds flat, not because it's fraudulent, because it sounds flat, if nothing else, right? Yeah, I also want to talk a little bit about like some sample example, the kinds of questions that colleges ask, and I want to talk. Maybe you can talk about this, Claire, about how these when something that people really need to understand is that in many cases, if you read the essays that colleges ask you to write, that tells you a great, a really meaningful way whether you're a good fit for that college or not. Because if you have a good answer to that question, then perhaps you're a good fit for them. If you don't have a good answer to that question, you may not be the kind of college student they're looking for. And what's more important, they may not be the kind of college you are looking for. Claire, yeah, is that fair? You want to elaborate?
Yeah, I mean, I think UChicago is a good example, the first example you have on the slide, and this is one of their prompts, but they also have sort of a second prompt that has an equally long, I think it's 500 words maybe, and one of the famous ones is they just have it, the prompt is find X, and then you have to write a 500-word essay about that.
Very obscure and confusing.
Yeah. So, and yeah, there are other options for this weird prompt, but yeah. So I think, they're really asking students to be creative there with their answers and really, like you said, show that they're a good fit for this school that is asking that type of prompt. If when you see that prompt, you think, this is ridiculous, I don't want to write that, or like, what are they talking about? Or this is, then yeah, maybe UChicago's not not the place that you want to go, right? It should be that you're like, oh my gosh, this is so interesting and fun that this is the way they're asking that prompt. So yeah, like Swami said, this is highlighting a sort of a value of University of Chicago that you can tell even just from reading their essay prompts.
Right.
And then, yeah,
the Harvard question that says, how do you hope to use your Harvard education in the future, tells you Harvard's really looking for people who are looking ahead to say, I want to go to Harvard so that I can do this. Like, who are less focused on Harvard than on the thing that education will enable for them. Right. So I think, this sort of gets back to that question that you were asking a few minutes ago, Claire, about, how do you balance all these things? I'd say, junior year is the year you want to lay the groundwork for your applications, right? So first, most important thing, by far the most important thing, stay consistent academically. Academics matter a lot. Academics matter perhaps more than anything else in the college admissions process at the end of the day, because academics tell a college whether you are prepared for the kind of work that they will ask you to do. And so that's a ground level concern for colleges. They want to know that, hey, we admit the student when they start school here, they will be able to handle the work we expect them to do when they show up, right? And plan courses strategically. Like, think about how you take AP courses, honors courses, and like think about how you want to balance all of that, right? Claire, does that make sense? Do you have thoughts about that?
I mean, I think the important thing there is, sometimes students want every class to be an AP. And if they can succeed in 6 or 7 AP classes, then great. But it's not going to look good if they have a lot of AP classes or honors classes and then they're doing poorly in them. So I think it's about finding that balance that works for them. Like, of course, the rigor of the courses is important, but doing well in them is equally important. So, making sure that students are choosing courses that, are going to push them, but that they are also going to be able to, keep up with their work and do well in them.
Right. And this is a question that comes up a lot, right? My friend's doing AP US history. Should I do it too? It's impossible for us to say taking harder courses won't help. But sometimes if you take harder courses and don't do well at them, then it really hurts. So you have to find a balance between taking harder courses and taking a course load that you are able to handle. And I think that level of self-awareness of being able to say, I understand my strengths and I also understand my limitations, is really, really, really important as you go to college, because it will help you find a better fit. And then as we talked about, connect academics to your major, especially if you're applying to majors where that preparation is valuable. So there are certain majors, when you think about nursing or engineering or computer science, or if you're applying to a pre-med program, where they really do want to understand that you understand what you're getting into and you're capable of the work that you will be asked to do. And it's obviously also important for, say, for example, performing arts majors or visual arts majors, right? If you're applying to play the piano at Berklee College of Music in Boston, you should be able to play the piano. It's quite important, right? They care a lot about that, right? So like that, connecting your work to your major can be quite important. It's not critical for everyone. In other words, if you're applying to study sociology, it's not necessary that you've taken sociology in high school. Yeah, if you're, it isn't a one-to-one thing, but for certain majors, that can be quite important, right? And then, of course, build teacher relationships, so important. And I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about like teacher relationships and staying involved with extracurriculars, deepening your extracurricular portfolio. Claire, do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the build the teacher relationship aspect of it, it's really important that this is done authentically, that you really are building a relationship with them, that you're not, I mean, of course, it also is that you want them to write a letter of recommendation from you. But, I have a student who I've worked with, and she helps her biology teacher put together labs for like other classes, just because she just like does it in, I don't know when, breaks or lunchtime or after school. And she just does it. And she has just genuinely cultivated a strong relationship with this teacher because of it. And, she's helping her teacher. She's getting to, help with the labs. And when she had to ask for a letter of recommendation, it was just, a no-brainer that he was going to write a very positive letter of recommendation, really knowing who she is as a student. So I think just this piece, it's really important that relationship you're building is authentic, and that will come through in the letters of rec the same way, a student's authenticity is going to come through in their essays. And then, yeah, in terms of extracurriculars, I just think, like it's written here, it's important to not just have this be a laundry list. So sometimes students just think, if I do one more, volunteer day or one more, just sort of trying to make it cumulative, whereas, again, this is a whole picture. So thinking about doing extracurriculars and doing activities that are really important, that are connected to your interests, your values, and that you have a time commitment to, perhaps a leadership position within, all of this is going to be more important than just a long list of different things that you've done.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then testing and timelines. I want to talk a little bit about this because this whole thing has been so complicated over many years, right? Of course, standardized tests were required at most colleges until the COVID pandemic hit. And then they went to, most colleges went to test optional. Some colleges like the UCs and the Cal States went further and said that they would test blind. They would not consider standardized tests like the SAT and the ACT at all in their admissions process. The UCs and the Cal States still follow that policy and will, for the next few years anyway, follow that policy. There's some talk about whether that might change in the future, and maybe it will. We'll certainly keep an eye on it, but it's not a given. But beyond that, for colleges that aren't the UCs and aren't the Cal States, standardized testing has become much more important. So even when colleges say they are test optional, very few are genuinely test optional. Like people will say that your application gets the same reading whether you have test scores or not, but that's only true at a small number of schools. At most colleges, submitting a test score does make a difference, and submitting a strong test score makes a huge difference. Sometimes even submitting a marginal test score makes a positive difference because it basically obviates the need for the colleges to make assumptions about what your test score would have been. that they didn't see, right? So the first thing is when to test. We just had a conversation about this, Claire, the other day with a student. And I just want to say, if you're in sophomore year, please let it go. Just don't think about the standardized tests at all. Please just let it go. Just stop. Just don't do it. Stop. Start thinking about when the summer of junior year, summer that before junior year. So the summer between sophomore and junior year, start thinking about it then. Build a plan. Build a plan by taking practice tests and assessing where you are, assessing where you'd like to be and what the difference is and how much prep it takes, and plan to take the test ideally in the spring of junior year, perhaps in the winter of junior year if you want to start a little earlier, and then so that you'll have the opportunity to retake it in the summer between junior and senior year, and possibly in the fall of senior year again, right? There's an enormous amount of pressure in some places for students to take the test sooner, and so this is one of those things that happens. I've already taken the test. Have you? And then people feel like, oh my goodness, so many of my friends have already taken the test. But just let it be. There's plenty of time. And the reason why I say that, and I'm kind of pushy about this with students, is because it takes away from other things. And for some students, they genuinely aren't prepared in sophomore year to take the test. So there are rare exceptions. If you can take the test in spring of sophomore year and get a 36 on the ACT, then by all means take it, be done with it. You won't have to take it again, right? Be finished. Take it once and done. But one of the things that I want to emphasize to people is that the goal shouldn't be to take it 6 times. Once is ideal, twice is okay, thrice is the max, and then just leave it be at that. Yeah, Claire, any questions about any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just add, that not only not stretching out, like retaking it over and over again, but it really is more effective to have your prep be short and condensed and intense right before you take the test. So preparing, just doing a couple exercises and sort of like, I don't know, looking at Khan Academy and going along for, half a year, 8 months, something like this. It's not the most productive way to do it. You really want
a huge waste of time.
Yeah, so short and condense and take the test.
Don't retake it. Like if this happens a lot, most students will take the test and say, oh, I didn't get the score I wanted, I'm going to take it again next month. And it pretty much never works because nothing's actually changed. The tests are carefully constructed to test your level of ability. And if you take it in the next month, your level of ability didn't really go up. You didn't learn the material any better. So there's no good reason to believe your test score is going to go up either, right? So spend time to prepare to get the score you want.
And then also a question that I get a lot is whether to take the SAT or the ACT. So just to say either one is fine. There's equivalency. So colleges will look at both of, either of them. You don't need to take both of them. And so just take a practice test
and take practice tests and figure out which one comes easier to you and prepare only for that one. Definitely don't prepare for both tests. Nobody should prepare for both tests. It's a waste of time. B, in practice, my observation anyway is that when students prepare for both tests, they will do worse on both tests because it's sort of like training to be a middle distance runner and a long distance runner at the same time. They need different skills. If you train to optimize your speed as a middle distance runner, you're not going to win a marathon. Conversely, if you train to run a marathon, you're not going to win the middle distance race. It's just like that. They require different skills. Not the subject matter, but the test taking skills are quite different, right? One test is slower and a little more intellectually complex. The other test is more straightforward but faster. They're just different. They work for different students.
Yeah. So, there's one question back from the previous slide about letters of recommendation. Someone asked whether students should choose their teachers who are teaching the subjects from the student's major choice.
Great question. First of all, just remember first that like in high school, you might have 5 or 6 subjects that you study. In college, there are hundreds of majors. So finding the teacher who taught the major of your choice in high school is not really a plausible idea most of the time, right? So that said, I think in general, for most students, what colleges want is a recommendation. If they ask for, sometimes they'll ask for one recommendation, sometimes they'll ask for two, sometimes they'll allow three. It varies, right? If they allow for multiple recommendations, ideally you can have one from a STEM-like major and one from a social science or English-like major or languages. And the reason is because, generally speaking, it's not really so much about the major of your choice. Your teacher's recommendation isn't really saying, this student is the most amazing physicist I've ever met or whatever. If you are the most amazing physicist, it should show up in some other way, right? Like by winning the F=ma, whatever, like championship or the physics Olympiad or whatever. It should show up somewhere else if you are the most amazing physicist. But what teachers' recommendations are for, like how the student participates in class, what contribution they make, what they are like in terms of the work they do and their assignments and so on and so forth. And having recommendations, one from a STEM teacher and one from a non-STEM teacher, allows colleges to assess what the student is like for in situations where there is a correct answer and in situations where there are no correct answers, right? So like a history class doesn't usually have correct answers to questions. It tests the student's critical thinking. And they want to see what you're like in that situation. And they want to see the other case, in calculus class, there is a correct answer. And they want to see what you're like in terms of your ability to reason through complex things and figure it out, right?
And Swami, there's one more question about SAT or SAT and ACT. They asked, can you finish one and then prepare for another one?
Yeah, I'd say if you finish a test, take your time and prepare for the next one. Like allow enough time to prepare for the next one so that when you take the next one, like you took a test, you got a score, you look at your answers, you say, here are the questions I got right, here's the questions I got wrong. What does that say about what, maybe I don't know the rules of English grammar precisely. Maybe I have trouble with vocabulary and context. Maybe I don't know the rules of how to solve quadratic equations, maybe, whatever they are. Learn those things and prepare so that when you retake the test, you really understand those things better, more fluently. And I think one of the things that's hard for people to understand is that these tests don't just test knowledge, they test fluency. I was having lunch with someone and talking about like students who might study AP French and then go to France and find that they can't speak French because the AP French class does give you knowledge of French, but it doesn't give you fluency in French. When you're faced with a circumstance where you have to think of the next word in French, it doesn't immediately come to you. And to do well on the SAT or the ACT, you have to be fluent in the concepts. In other words, you have to be able to see a sentence and immediately say the comma's in the wrong place. Sometimes, that being able to know that is really important. Just know it without having to reason it through.
Perfect.
Yeah, and then summer programs and portfolios. I think this is also your opportunity to think about your summer. I do want to say at the outset, you don't have to go to a summer program necessarily. The most underrated thing to do in the summer is to get a job. So I want to start with that. Like, just get a job at your local coffee shop or the library or the doctor's office, greeting patients or whatever. Get a job, because colleges value enormously students who understand the basic things that a job teaches people, right? Show up on time, do what you're told, work well with others. These are really important life skills, right? But for certain students, there are specific things that are really important. If you're applying to for example, an architecture program, or you're applying to a, design program, it's important you build a portfolio, because you may need to submit one for your application. And this summer that summer between junior and senior year is a great time to think about that. If you're applying to very selective STEM programs, demonstrating research capability is quite important, right? Likewise, if you're applying to a pre-med program and a very selective pre-med program, having done research can be a difference maker in your application. And then this is also your opportunity to perhaps do service work, but find service work you find passion in, right? So it's easy to say, just like do whatever hours, accumulate hours here or there. But, for example, if you're passionate about preventing domestic violence, then find the local domestic violence prevention center and go help there. If you're, if there's some cause, environmental preservation, hunger, reducing hunger, whatever, find an organization that will allow you to make a contribution, and focus on contributions, right? That will allow you to show up something on your essay. And then internships, which can again be really helpful as long as they are genuinely meaningful. In other words, that you're not just saying I did an internship at company X and the person reading it said, okay, so what? You have to be able to say, well, here's what I learned and here's why I did this. Here's what it took to find this internship, like that kind of work. So, Claire, does that make sense? Do you have thoughts about any of that?
Just that I put a link to another Substack post about summer and planning for summers, that if people want to check that out. Okay. Swami, there's also another question about SAT and letters of rec. I wasn't sure if you wanted to address those now or save them for the end.
Yeah, you can ask. Let's go ahead. Let's finish.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one says, is it worth finishing SAT, getting a satisfying score, and then preparing for the ACT?
No, if you prepare, nobody should take both tests. I don't know how to say this more simply. Nobody should take both tests. No college cares at all that you've submitted both tests. No one anywhere cares. If you have a score you want on the SAT, let it be. Don't take the ACT. Find the best test for you and prepare for that.
And then another question about letters of rec. Is it okay to have a recommendation letter from just a school teacher, or do they need recommendations from outside of school?
Yeah, great question. Recommendations are so, let's say you have an Eagle Scout, your Eagle Scout mentor, or you're a big, the church has been a big part of your life, and you have a person in your church who who wants to write a letter of recommendation for you. The most important thing about letters of recommendation is please don't seek to overwhelm the application reader with the number of recommendations you submit. They only have a certain amount of time to read your application, and the amount of time doesn't change if you submit more recommendations. So just be mindful of the person reading your application, that they don't want to read multiple recommendations that all say the same thing. So adding additional recommendations, some schools will allow it. Those are called other recommenders in the Common App. Like you can submit a letter from a teacher, and then you can submit other recommenders from a research mentor or someone else. And those can be very meaningful if they say something different. And then, of course, some colleges, the most notable example being the Universities of California, do not accept letters of recommendation at all, period. They will not read them. So for students applying to those, you don't have to worry about letters of recommendation.
Okay, great.
And then one thing we talk a lot about, and Claire, maybe you can kind of talk us through this about, building a balanced college list.
Yeah. So, when students are starting their research and looking into all the schools they're interested in, then obviously they eventually need to narrow this down to the list that they want to apply to. And so, this idea of balance means that some are reaches, right? Some are very competitive schools. Some are match. So this is a really good fit and the student is likely to get in. Or maybe I shouldn't say likely, has a good chance of getting in, and then likely being the third option that there's a high level of confidence that the student would get into this, and making sure that you have schools from all three of those sort of categories is really important. And, I think it's important to really feel excited about all three types of schools, right? Even if it's a likely, this doesn't mean that you shouldn't be equally excited about attending it. So, I feel sometimes that students, it's like the schools I like, or, that I love, that I kind of like, and that I don't really care about, right? And this isn't a very good way of looking at a list. You should be really excited about all the schools, and then obviously they have varying levels of competitive admissions rates. So
right.
Yeah,
building that. I think it's a little like sometimes we use the analogy of a restaurant, right, Claire? Like we talk to students and say, it's like sometimes you might go to a restaurant, there's a long line to get in, and sometimes you might go to a restaurant and it's not crowded at all. But it doesn't really matter as long as you like the food. And you shouldn't be more excited about the food just because there are lots of people waiting outside the restaurant. It doesn't make the food taste any better, right? So really, it's about finding the place where you will thrive. I think that's really, really important, right? Finding a place where you will thrive. And that kind of ability to assess where you will be success. And that's why I started by talking about like these students getting into programs at Virginia and Case Western and so on. They're all very high quality programs, highly regarded programs. So, but you have to really focus on the program as you apply to these colleges, right? So finding that fit is really important. And then, and the other thing that's kind of important about this business of researching a college list and building a college list is that for most students, where they go to high school had nothing to do with them. It's a function of where their family lives. Their parents made a choice, we're going to go to the school. Maybe there were a couple choices, but you choose within the community where you live for most people, right? But where a student goes to college is a much wider choice. They can pick colleges from all over the country, in some cases from all over the world. So thinking carefully about what it is you value in that education is so important, right? Say, I like this college because the class sizes are small and I get to know my teachers, or I like this college because there are professors who have Nobel Prizes. What is it you find really meaningful about the experience, right? And then I just want to say, like, I had a conversation with a former student who now is at Cornell, and it was a fascinating conversation. He's actually writing a piece about it for our Substack. And he said when he was applying to Cornell, he like went through all of the research with us, like, academics and this and that. He got to Cornell. He spent the first year there. He found himself bored and a little lonely. He was doing fine academically, but he wasn't having the greatest experience. He talked to his dad, who told him, hey, just focus on output, not on input. In other words, focus not on what you're like taking in information from the professor. Focus on doing something with the things you're learning. He went back, discovered that Cornell has a radio station, and he started volunteering at this radio station. Now he has his own radio show on campus. And that has changed his experience entirely. The thing that has turned out to be the most valuable for him at Cornell, what isn't the classes he's doing, it's the experience he's having at the radio station of like trying to raise money and find guests and do all of this kind of entrepreneurial stuff. That's so meaningful, right? So that's what it means by like finding a fit, finding a place where you can have that experience that 20, 30 years later, you'll still remember the experience, right?
So just a couple other questions.
Yes, we're going to run a little bit over for people on. Really appreciate it. Hopefully that's okay. Please stick with us.
Someone asked, do schools specify how many letters of recommendation are needed?
Yes, on the Common App and so on, you'll see colleges will say we'll accept 1 letter, we'll accept 2 letters, we'll accept 3, like whatever. They're pretty clear about their policies. And when we work with students, we guide them to all of that. We are the Life Launcher platform and our tools, track all of that information for each university. And if you look at the Life Launcher college profiles, you can see all of that on those profiles as well.
And someone else asked, does it matter if the person giving the letter of recommendation is not a good writer? Should we choose the scout leader that writes well over the leader that has known my child the longest?
That is a great question. Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult question. I will say this. I mean, finding someone who's known your child the longest is generally better, unless you feel you have good reason to believe that person won't be able to articulate what makes your child a special and interesting and awesome fit for the colleges they're applying to, right? What makes them a great, what makes their character, their personality, their qualities really interesting and special. As long as they can do that, the quality of the writing doesn't really make any difference. Colleges aren't sitting there saying, this person writes like Toni Morrison and that person doesn't. They're not evaluating these recommendations as in terms of the quality of the writing, as long as it is clear. As long as it's clear. And I think that I would say that principle in my mind applies to virtually everything. All the writing we talk about, the biggest, this is off the topic a bit, but I'll just say the biggest, when I think about all the essays I've read, thousands and thousands and thousands of, the most biggest flaw in most writing is that that it's not clear what the writer is trying to say. That you read it and you say, I don't understand how this relates to the question that was asked. If you walk away with that, you're like, okay, better, more elaborate words, complicated language don't help if you can't understand what it is. So as long as the person's clear, then the quality of the writing isn't that important. But if they're not clear, then of course you should find someone whose writing is clear. That can happen sometimes, and I think if the issue is really that the writer, for example, if the recommendation is someone who doesn't speak English well, then sometimes what is ideal to do is to have that person work with someone else, not you, someone else who can help translate for them. Yeah, and then of course, we talked a little bit about this, right? About thousands of choices. I think we've gone over most of this. I would say, go over all of these kinds of things, like use research and rankings, focus on fit. And then I want to give people a sense of timeline, right? So academic and junior extracurricular prep, of course, you're working through junior year. You're starting standardized testing. You're starting really in the winter all the way through spring of junior year, ideally. Summer planning starting now and all the way through the spring after senior year. College research, like ideally, this is that time when you're doing college research to try to build a list so that by the end of the spring semester, you have a solid college list. And then summer, you can use your summer to do your writing, to write your essays, and then file your application in the fall of senior year so that you can start, dealing with costs and financial aid and FAFSA and all that in the fall of senior year. So that's sort of roughly a timeline as to how all of this works. Claire, does that all make sense to you? Am I confusing?
No, yeah, that looks good. Yeah.
Okay. And then really, we'll go through this quickly, but I think, I want to talk a little bit about holistic review. I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I want to talk about these many things that colleges look for. Academic rigor and performance. How did you do relative to the choices you had? And I think the key is always relative to the choices you had. So if your school doesn't offer AP Calculus, they're not going to hold it against you that you didn't take AP Calculus. But if your school does offer AP Calculus and you don't take it, they will wonder why you didn't take it. That doesn't mean you should take it, but it means you should have a good reason why you didn't take it, right? So you should have thought it through. And then extracurricular engagement. Again, I would say the most important thing about extracurricular engagement is quality over quantity. You don't need to have 25 extracurriculars. I give the example sometimes of our student who got into Princeton, who had only 2 extracurricular activities that he did. He played chess. He was a nationally ranked chess player. And he did research. He did economics research and published a paper with a professor at the University of Florida. His only other passion, he did community service work. He taught chess to senior citizens who had Alzheimer's disease, so that every single time they met with him, to them, it was the first time they were meeting with him. And to them, it was the first time they were hearing about the rules of chess, even though he was meeting with the same people week after week, right? They just forgot him and they forgot the rules of chess. But he loved doing the work. It meant so much to him. And you could see when he wrote his essay how hard he had worked at that. But, when he first met with us, he said, I don't have a lot of extracurriculars. Does it matter? I said, no, it doesn't make any difference. The things you do, you can see why you do them. And you can see that there's a genuine passion and you have a track record of success. And that's, I think, what ends up mattering in these applications. Character and personal qualities, which really are underrated in this whole process, right? Colleges really want to understand who the student is. Are they the kind of person who will thrive on our campus? And sometimes that shows up through your essays and recommendation. And then finally, fit and demonstrated interest. And I want to talk about this a little bit because demonstrated interest, so for those that don't know, is the idea that colleges assess how likely you are to attend. So if you apply, for example, you'll have students from California who apply to the University of Michigan commonly, and they don't get accepted sometimes. And a lot of times the explanation is simply the University of Michigan didn't think that a California kid is going to come to Michigan to go to college, right? So they don't want to hold a spot for you. They would rather give the spot to someone who they think is more likely to accept the offer, right? So at some colleges, they explicitly track it. Did you attend an admission session? Did you speak to a rep? At some colleges, they don't explicitly track it, but that kind of management of yield, as they call it in the business, really affects how they make admissions offers, because they're trying, like, in order to fill X number of spots, they have to make Y number of offers, and they're trying to figure out how to make sure that their metrics make sense, right? So that they don't end up with an under-enrolled class at the end of the process. And so 5 keys to standing out, really. First, we talked about this: build a strategic plan, have a plan and stick to it. Don't listen to every little bit of feedback along the way. Be patient and mindful about your process. Second, choose a major that is aligned with your strengths. And I just want to say that again and again: just choose a major that's aligned with your strength. Don't choose a major because you think people who study that get a great job. You won't get a great job unless you're good at it. Right? So find a major that connects to something you're good at. So if you love math and you study computer science, that's great. If you genuinely love the kind of work that physicians do when you're on a pre-med program, that's great. If you have an entrepreneurial mind and want to study business, that's great. If you love, understanding why people make the choices they do and you want to, study psychology, that's great, right? That if you find a major that's aligned with your strengths, you will do well. And then I think Claire talked about this: building a smart, balanced college list. Build a list that's really solid, that is well-researched and statistically balanced. Reach target likely schools, all of which you would really be happy to attend. Showcase your strengths, tell your story. Be sure that at the end of it, when you submit the application, you read it and you're like, wow, that seems like me. I can see myself in that application. It's hard. One of the things we say to students sometimes is to remember this: the person reading your application will never see you in person. So they have to make a decision based on what you say on paper. And so make sure the paper reflects you. So if you have this, like sometimes you'll meet a student, you're like, you have this amazing, bubbly, charming personality, and you want to make sure that that shows up on that application. When you read you can see that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I think after looking at so many applications over the years, they're really different, right? They really are examples of the students. I always am interested in how much it kind of all works. You do see the student when you're looking at the essays and the extracurriculars and all of it. So yeah, I know it's so hard, students are like, but I want to get accepted. And then we're saying be authentic, and it feels like those two things maybe don't go together, but they just genuinely do. And so I think students can trust that and just be themselves. It really will work out the way that it should.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, I had a student who loved math, who genuinely loved math. And then he wrote this essay about how he couldn't go to sleep at night sometimes, and he would go to bed and turn off the light, and and then at 1 a.m. in the morning, he'd wake up and turn on the lights and write down the answer to a question because it came to him in the middle of the night. You could see the passion that kid had for this, right? It's like he was doing this not because he needed to, but because it really stuck in his head. Another kid who academically very accomplished kid who wrote his whole essay about origami and how much he loved origami, and how everyone has something that showcase their strength, and you read it and you're like, okay, I see who this person is. I see who they are,
Yeah, absolutely.
And then start early to stay organized and confident. It just, the work doesn't change. If you start late, it just piles up and it's very intense. It can feel overwhelming to students. So, get started early. So I just want to say a few takeaways here, right, as we get to the end. One is, junior year really does set the stage. This is the time that matters most on your college application. So invest the time it takes to do the best you can in this year. And thinking about, I'd say in general, understanding all of this is really helpful. Stressing over it isn't really helpful. If you're a parent, watching this, I just want to say to you, please stay thoughtful and calm, because your calm will rub off on your children. If you're anxious, your kids sense it. They always do. They just feel it. And it's much harder for them to navigate this process. If you stay calm and say, just be methodical, do your best at every step, everything will be everything will work out at the end, and you will teach them a good life skill, right? And then focus on fit and purpose. Really, please focus on fit and purpose. Like, that is the most important thing, you know. And then before I get into next steps and how we can help, Claire, you want to talk about any questions?
There's a few more, yeah. Someone asked, how much time does a college admissions committee usually spend reading essays and letters of recommendations before making a decision?
Yeah, that varies a lot. So think about the University of California, for example, which has a very straightforward application. UC applications are read by 2 people at the outset. Each person probably spends about 8 minutes reading the application. So just think about that for a second. 8 minutes to read your academic preparation, your family background, your activities list, your PIQ responses, the whole lot. They spend 8 minutes reading it, and they have to make basically a yes, no, or maybe decision on you. And then the other person does the same thing, and then they make a recommendation, usually to a bigger committee that has to debate, and then the yeses are usually go on, the no's usually get set aside, and the maybes are debated and discussed, so more time gets spent on that. But that's roughly how the process works. Some colleges spend more time. Some colleges will spend 15, 20 minutes reading an application, but you should think, you know, somewhere between 8 and 20 minutes. And that kind of highlights the point, you know, make sure that you really communicate who you are in your application.
And then one other question, someone asked, what's the best website to see the rankings of schools by major?
Great question. I would say first, please don't stress over rankings. This is like saying I picked a restaurant based on the Michelin star reviews. I mean, what difference does it make to you whether the restaurant has a Michelin star or not if you don't like the food? Like, you're not going to be happier eating the food if you hate, and you're like, I hate every time I put it in my mouth, this stuff makes me gag. But it has a Michelin star, so that life doesn't work like that. Find a school which fits you. On Life Launcher, we do track. If you go to the Life Launcher college profiles, you will see the university's rankings. American universities aren't often ranked by major because the systems don't quite work like that in the US. If you were to look at universities in the UK or others, there are rankings like the QS rankings that do rank universities by major. But American universities aren't generally ranked like that because most American students can switch majors easily. And most universities have a complex set of programs, right? We talk about like the pre-med program at Case Western. So like there are so many rankings. Honestly, these rankings, if you were to go look at them, would be really misleading. So my honest suggestion to you is to do your research, do the hard work of looking at the college and figuring out whether it's a good fit for you. And then very briefly, I'm going to close with a little promo as well. One of the reasons why people work with us, of course, is because we do a thorough, meticulous job. We have high quality resources. We help students really identify what's important to them. We help them really craft their essays mindfully, help each student find their own strengths and help them really find a school that is a great choice for them. That last sentence, it says, this program helped me get into my choice of school, is the kind of thing that makes me happy. Because it's really about the student's top choice, right? It's not about whether it's the highest ranked school. It's whether the student wanted to attend. And so we have comprehensive coaching packages. I'll put the link in the chat here. If you're interested, please schedule an initial consultation with us. I'll put it under the offers, you can see that, and then we can talk you through our various coaching packages and so on and so forth. We have programs that cover, all of it, academics, the testing plans, summer, college research, essays, self-reflection, tools and organization and all of that. So hopefully we have, I think we have tools to help with all of it. And I won't belabor you here with our entire essay process, but we're very, very, very meticulous. I do want to say there's a lot of writing. The American college admission system is very writing intensive. The median student who works with us has 17 essays to write. The median student, that means half have more than 17 essays to write. And we go through this in a thoughtful way. Claire, maybe you want to talk a little bit about like how we go through self-reflection and brainstorming and drafting and revising. And share just a quick thought. And we're running behind schedule, so I'm trying to speed through the rest.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think like we've been talking about just doing some brainstorming, sometimes we do a self-assess, a character assessment, sort of a value assessment, thinking about what the student wants to share. And then, yeah, just making sure that this process is really done in a careful way. So choosing your topics, we meet with students one-on-one in our weekly meetings. So we use that time to brainstorm and talk about what topics they could focus on. And then, yeah, like I said, multiple drafts to make sure that it really is a strong, thoughtful essay that's a good reflection of the student. And then obviously the finalizing, making sure, just the final things, word count and commas and, crossing your T's and dotting your I's and all of that, and making sure that each essay is really strong.
Yeah, awesome. And so if you're interested, please schedule an initial consultation. There's no obligation, but we'll kind of give you a detailed kind of follow-up report with things you should be thinking about and so on, and then you can decide if we're the right fit for you. So just click the link and you should be able to schedule it. And then finally, any final questions, Claire?
One final one is, what factors should we look at when choosing a college?
Okay, great question. What factors? Actually, I love that question because I think that gets to the heart of it, right? What factors? So first of all, academics, how good a fit is this college for you academically? And thinking, if you think about that, that really comes down to saying, do they offer the majors I want to study? Or if I don't know the majors I want to study, do they allow students to choose amongst the kinds of, can I apply to one and switch if I'm not completely sure? Do they offer special programs that I might care about? Do they have, if something is important to me, it's important to me to do undergraduate internships or undergraduate research. If I'm interested in what's called a 4+1 program where you can go 5 years and get a graduate with both a master's and a bachelor's degree. If they have a special advising track for students, say if someone wants to study law after undergraduate school, they have high quality advising track for pre-law students. So you're looking at that academics, like how good a fit, what things can I take advantage of, right? And in that context, I think thinking about experiential learning opportunities, right? When I go to college, more and more students are looking for experiential learning. They're looking, saying, I'm not just going to college, take a bunch of classes, walk away with a degree, then look for a job. The job market isn't like that these days. They really want students who are ready to work when they start. So if you can get do what's called a co-op program where you can get a credit for the work you do, or you have internship placements while you're in college, those can be incredibly helpful. And we'll do another presentation on career planning while you're in college, because that's another thing that's really important as well. But thinking about those things as part of your college research is important. Then culturally, first of all, think about what you want to do. Like, what clubs might I want to join? Clubs that you might want to join for career prep. Maybe they have a program specifically for people who want to be entrepreneurs. But they may also have clubs that you really find fun, right? Because college isn't just about work. It should be a fun place. It should be a place where you meet your community. My college that I went to undergraduate school with is having its 40th reunion right now as I speak. Mm-hmm. I'm not there, obviously, but many of my friends are. And honestly, the people I met there were the most special people I've ever met. They made, I'm still close friends. Most people who remember the friends they made while they were in college. So ask yourself, where would I make friends? Where will I meet people who are, maybe you're really interested in anime, maybe you're really interested in some other thing, right? In choir, whatever, find clubs that you find interesting. So finding a cultural fit, and sometimes that means finding a school that's a fit for, where, like, for example, maybe you're looking for a college that's very diverse, where you feel like, okay, I'm not going to be the only person of my category, or a college that's friendly to students like you, especially for students who are gay or in the LGBTQ plus community. Many people feel like they want to find a college that's friendly, that will be welcoming to them. It's also the case for students of faith sometimes, where they feel like, I want to go to, we had a student, for example, who was Jewish, religious, and very, and really important to him to go to college, where he could easily attend synagogue on a Friday night. And people have their personal beliefs, and you want to make sure that your college will respect and support and value you for the person you are. And then the other kinds of questions that's really important to ask are not only how good a fit is college for me, how good a fit am I for this college? So that question can be a little hard sometimes because, in other words, you're saying if a college is a very competitive culture and you just don't thrive in a culture that's competitive, you should ask yourself, will I be a good fit? If I show up, will I really struggle? Like that, right? Or if a college if all the other students there are going to be, like academic have been academic superstars all the way that they're with 4 years of high school, and you've done very well, but you just aren't there. You may do fine, but you may also find when you get there that it's like you're struggling all the time to do well, and you don't want to put yourself in that situation, right? So I sometimes this college research process really encourages people to be honest and self-reflective about who they are and their strengths and what they are looking for in the college experience. So those are some factors. Hopefully that helps. Yeah, any other questions, Claire?
There's nothing else in the chat. No, I think that's it.
Okay. Well, yeah, on behalf of both Claire and me, thank you so much to all of you for taking the time. I know we ran a little behind, and I hopefully am so glad most of the people who are on have stuck on. Thank you so much for taking the time to spend your afternoon with us. You should get a replay link, so you can certainly rewatch all of this. And if you have any questions, please do reach out to us, help@lifelauncher.com. Thanks so much. Claire, thank you so much for taking your time on a Saturday.
Thank you, everyone.
With all of us. Yeah. Thanks. Bye now.
Bye.